everyone, Ellie here to talk with you about this month's virtual craft kit, Cross Stitch. We are going to be making this super cute penguin I found online, thank you to the original creator Coconut from the free Cross Stitch Patterns website, with just a few modifications. I also wanted to say that it's okay if you make this craft your own. We provide the materials for the design you see here, but change anything you want to fit your own style. I just wanted to say one more thing before we get started. I wanted to let you know that I'm a bit of a self-taught cross-stitcher. I learned initially from my grandma, but because of this, if there is anything done differently that you've learned, please feel free to do it your way. I've tried to modify the video and my methods to match other tutorial videos I've seen online, but if there is ever anything unclear in my video, please check out other professional videos. Okay, let's get started. First, let's take a look at the supplies from the kit. If you didn't get a chance to pick up this kit, we are still going to list the supplies so that you can always do the craft at a later time with your own purchased materials. Looking down the line, you have your embroidery floss. I'm using a DMC brand. There's many others that you could use. You should have a black, a white, and an orange in your kit. Again, if you want to use different colors, please feel free. You also have a small wooden hoop for your design. Cross-stitch hoops can be wooden, they can be plastic, they can be metal, whatever suits your taste. You have your needle. I'm just using a sewing needle. I generally don't worry about the size, unless it's going to be so large it stretches out the holes in my canvas. We have our canvas, an 11 count Aida fabric cut into a 6x6 square. When it comes to canvas, the larger the number, the more squares there are per inch. So typically I'll use a 14, 16, or 18 count canvas depending on the size and complexity of my design. Lastly, you have a copy of the pattern we are using, and I would also say have a pair of scissors nearby for snipping threads. So let's talk about the thread. Embroidery thread is made up of 6 smaller strands of thread, and when you cross stitch, you only use 2 at a time. When I was learning, I was taught to use 3, and I could never figure out why my finished designs always looked puffier. I actually kind of like the look more than the 2 strands, but generally every tutorial I find suggests using 2 and no more. Once you have your thread separated all out, we are going to thread the needle. Unlike sewing, we aren't going to be tying the 2 ends together. We are going to leave a little tail at the top, and we're going to leave the end of the string unknotted for now. Depending on how we want to start and finish our stitches, you might see knots there, but for now we're going to leave it unknotted. So before we begin, let's look at the 2 different ways that we can cross stitch our design. First, we have a half stitch, where we create a row of stitches by working diagonally one way, and then coming back and crossing over those stitches. This is the method that I use the most. It is generally faster than the other stitch we'll look at. When it comes to the half stitch, you're trying to keep your thread slanted the same way on each stitch for a consistent look. If you're just learning, I wouldn't say don't worry about looking uniform unless you absolutely have to. A lot of times my stitches aren't even uniform. It's up to you. This is your own project, so if that's important, please feel free to do that. If it's not so important, don't worry about it for now. The next stitch you can do is called a 3/4 stitch. Basically, you complete the entire stitch so it looks like an X as you go along, instead of working diagonally one way and then coming back diagonally the other way. It's a bit slower, but you can really make sure you don't accidentally skip stitches. We've all been there. Again, if you're worried about uniformity, you can follow the diagram here that you see in the video, as well as other diagrams online. Definitely work with it with whatever works for you, especially if you're just learning. So when you cross stitch, there are many methods you can use to tie your beginning string and ending string. For beginners, I suggest tying a knot at the end of the string to catch the canvas and anchor your stitches. For advanced beginners, you can try leaving a little tail of string and then putting your stitches over the top to secure it. That's the method that I use. You can see me doing this method for a cleaner look, but as the professionals point out, no one sees the back of your design. You end the stitches the same way. You can either tie off the thread and clip the excess string, or you can use a method called burring the thread, where after the last stitch, you turn the needle horizontally and pull it through 3 or 4 completed stitches. It's important to bury your thread at least under 3 stitches, otherwise it might come loose and fall out. Snip the tail with a pair of scissors so that it won't get caught in other stitches. So just a little side note here as we're working in our design, you will probably encounter a time when your thread knots up and creates a giant mess. When this happens, it's important to work the knot really gently and not yank on the thread, as it will just tighten the knot until it's almost impossible to undo. I use the needle to try to undo the knot if I can. And at worst, I cut off before and after the knot and then just try to anchor my string and continue on. Once you get going, you'll often refer to the pattern to see the number of stitches or the color you'll be using for each area. I generally try to complete all of one color before moving on to another, but if it's easier for you to work row by row, go for it. Sometimes I forget where I am in a more complex design, so you can always cross off your done stitches with a pen or a marker. Some people even use online trackers like stitchfiddle.com to keep track of the stitches they've already completed. You use whatever works best for you. And there you have it, our completed picture of our cute penguin, along with an optional fabric for the back. You can find a tutorial about this online. It's just some felt and a blanket stitch. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next month for another cool virtual craft.